Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session talking about encampment coordination in the province of BC. There's 4 of us here today, and we'll introduce ourselves momentarily. I do want to get started by, first of all, acknowledging that we're here today on the traditional unceded territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples, and give thanks to those who have invited us to be here for these few days, to the caretakers of the lands and the waters, and say thank you. My name is Erin O'Shaney. So nice to see lots of faces here today. I'm the Executive Director of the Engagement and Encampment Response Branch for the Province of BC Ministry of Housing. And I'm here today with 3 colleagues.
Hi everybody, Alison Dunnett. I'm Executive Director for Homelessness at BC Housing, which is the Crown Corporation providing housing and homelessness services in BC. Nice to see you all.
And for the recording, that's Alison Dunnett from BC Housing.
Oh, recording. Want to stop with this thing?
Gotta talk into a mic.
Does it work? All right. Will they? They will. Hi everybody, Mike Sikora. I work for the City of Abbotsford, Senior Manager of Housing and Homelessness. Privilege of working with BC Housing and the Ministry of Housing on a lot of the things we're going to talk about today.
Hi everyone, I'm Maria Rodrigo. I'm Director for Supportive Housing and Shelter Delivery for the Fraser region with BC Housing.
What we wanted to talk about today is what our provincial approach is to encampment coordination and response, to provide some context, and then hear from what that really looks like on the ground in a local area. And then what we were hoping for was to then sit down at the tables with you and have some tabletop conversations to hear your insights around, where we have some challenges and some successes, and have a robust discussion just to make the work that much more fulsome, and hopefully be able to share some lessons and opportunities for all of you to take home to your home communities as well.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about encampment response in BC, but before I do, I want to get a sense of who is in the room here today. So I'm just going to ask folks to put up their hand. If you have worked frontline in an encampment, supporting people, providing information, services, and transition into housing, could you put up your hand? Yeah, ton of people far more expert than me in the room, and that's going to be really valuable to tap into in our cafe conversations. I'm going to switch that as well. If you have had responsibility in terms of getting funding, resources, advocating for better encampment response in your province or community, if you could put up your hand. Great. There is a long history of encampment response work that's been done by nonprofit partners, government agencies, people with lived and living experience, and particularly Indigenous partners in BC, that has been incredibly rich, challenged. Tons of learning has come from that. So we're only going to be able to kind of scratch the surface on some recent work here in BC. So I just want to acknowledge that. I have the privilege of working at BC Housing for the last 2 years, and one of my areas that I'm responsible for is encampment response work and supporting our teams and our partners across BC as they try and do that difficult work. What we have found, kind of looking back retroactively at many of the encampment responses, is that it's just hard work. Like it's damn hard work. I actually hate trying to talk about positive things or best practices and wins. It just feels really false. So I would say it's like doing the best you can in a really crappy situation. And I think that's what our partners strive to do and what we've been striving to do. There is inherently at the root of encampments a lack of adequate and affordable housing and shelter. And we are seeing a significant rise in BC in encampments, which I'll talk about in a second. On top of that, as many sessions at this conference have talked about, there are barriers to people's individual needs, their situation within our housing and shelter that we do have that make it not a fit for them. We've learned a lot, and there's just a few pictures here from across the region of encampment responses that we've worked on. But one of the things we found consistently is that we were not particularly well organized in British Columbia when an encampment got to what we would call a complex situation. We had encampments that took multiple years of tables planning to get to resolution. And some of what you're going to see today, I think, is really about setting ourselves up in coordination to move much more nimbly while still being thoughtful and grounded in good practice. The position in BC is that while we recognize that encampments provide safety and the draw is often around community and connection, that we have seen over the last 10 years, over time, these spaces become places that are not safe for individuals to stay in long term, generally due to predation, but also the environment. And what I'm very excited about is that there's now a recognition that this is not something that just the housing and homelessness sector can fix. We have a whole of government response to this work in BC, which brings in health dedicated to working on encampments, mental health and addictions teams, social development, poverty reduction. So we've got kind of all the partners, at least at the provincial level, at the table. And we're going to talk more about how we now have our municipal partners in deeper partnership on this. And just wanted to give a bit of a snapshot if you haven't been to British Columbia. At this point, encampments are found in all regions of the province. We have a complex encampment, which generally understood something to be fairly entrenched and of a size that is not going to resolve without some concerted effort by partners. This is a snapshot. We're now tracking in BC, so it's a snapshot of activity from early October of 2024 of where our staff at BC Housing are engaged and connected in encampments. It's not a fulsome picture. There are many encampment sites that we do not have staff in and connected with, but it gives you a sense of the scale. We do find that some sites resolve. They resolve, people make choices, they move to other spaces. So we are trying to get, at this time, given resources, a handle on the most complex and challenging encampments. And just to say, as you're going to hear today, really does take that coordination and effort by all parties to get to more positive resolutions on encampment spaces. I'm going to turn over to Erin now.
Apologies for those who are in the 1 o'clock session. This will be a slight repeat for a couple of slides. So in 2023, the province released the first provincial homelessness plan called Belonging in BC. And this was the first time that there was a comprehensive and coordinated directive for all of us across the province and our different ministries to do a much better job of working together. So mandate letters, named joint initiatives, and there were some strong expectations outlined in terms of achieving an ambitious mandate and learning how to work differently together. The Belonging in BC homelessness plan has a whole range of initiatives that are in early days of implementation, everything from supported rent programs to complex care to community integration specialists, and working with a number of partner ministries and Crown agencies, social development and poverty reduction, mental health and addictions, health, public safety and solicitor general, to name a few. But for today, because we would be here for hours to talk about all that's going on, we're going to talk about the specific encampment coordination programs that we have at a provincial level to start. So first of all, there just are, as Alison said, a number of encampments. This is growing, and the complexity as well. Anecdotally, we've tracked more than 300 encampments in the last year, representing more than 3,000 people. And as Alison said, we're not touching all the encampments across the province, so we know the numbers are more, and they're growing. And so learning how to do a better job of being more nimble and better coordinated and stronger connections at the local level to actually remove barriers rather than place some, which I know government can be notorious for. There's also dedicated Heart and Hearth programs. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have a resource that's in development called the Encampment Partner Resource. It's a policy and practice guide. And I know there's some folks in the room here who have provided some input on that. I think this is you, actually. Yeah. It seemed like such a good idea.
To bounce around? Yeah, okay. So this slide, I think most folks in the room would understand this kind of intuitively, but as we talk about the work and being more systematic in our approach with partners, what we noticed looking at those encampments that I had up on the earlier slide is that where we got to better outcomes with one another and really better for the folks we're serving in the encampment, but also for our staff. I can't tell you how many times I read reports on encampments where the staff were like, please just do a better job in how you support us to support people, like a lot of deep frustration. So what we found is that when we had done thoughtful pre-planning, that we'd really brought the right people together and made the space for that. And one of the key things we noted in that pre-planning is making sure you've got partners involved who can keep things at a bit of a low hum to give you the space to plan. That's often very, very hard to do. As soon as you start planning, eyes on tends to escalate. So really working to get some de-escalation pieces in place around services and sanitation and other things that can give you some time to work together. That we had really thought through collaborative decision-making protocols, which is not easy to get multiple layers of government and enforcement partners. You have different challenges and rules around decision-making, but getting to some of that quickly and holding accountability with one another around that. Making sure that we differentiated between service and enforcement. It's sometimes a very close line, but very important for us to keep some differentiation by those who are there to help people transition out of the site versus those who are there in an enforcement role. And keeping housing first as really our North Star. But one of the tensions I'll just say, it's very hard right now in British Columbia, is there's also a real desire to see shelter as a gateway to housing. And not in the sense that you have to and must go to shelter because that's the right way to earn your housing, which I know that stigma is there, that vision is there. But really what we saw over multiple rounds of encampments is a deep frustration from our shelter providers and people sitting in shelter who said, so I've been here for 2 years. I've been waiting on a coordinated access list, but you're gonna hold units, you're gonna build a supply of units for 6 months and prioritize everybody in that encampment that you ring fenced, and I don't get housing. And I think that's a fair question around equity. We try to really stand in the gray on this one, that it's not an all or nothing. Everybody isn't gonna go to shelter before they get housing. That doesn't work either. We gotta be willing to live in the nuance, and we're really trying to walk that in British Columbia right now. It's challenging, but I think we're making headway. And then aftercare, so through that transition, making sure you've got the resources, you've got the staff, you've got the planning, but then have you thought about what happens next? And we've had a lot of the unfortunate what happens next, where we've put a lot of time and effort into an encampment response, and then we've been right back in that exact piece of land a year later, right? And that's deeply frustrating for everybody involved. Doesn't win you a lot of support, I would say, within your government partners and funders as well. So thinking about what does aftercare look like for the land, for the individuals in that space, what kind of commitment do you have to ensuring housing stability for the folks who are there? And a willingness to start to look at the data around that is something that's growing in BC, which I'm excited about. It's not easy to look at. We've had people in multiple encampments who we are housing and rehousing. We need to look at that. Why? What do we know about those folks? What are we missing? Where are we dropping the ball in that conversation? So this is our approach, our kind of 3-step way of thinking about the work.
Under the Belonging BC plan, there's 2 new programs that have rolled out in priority communities called the HEARTH and HEARTH. And the HEARTH is specific to bringing partners together that represent those different areas that we referenced before. So health, housing, different service agencies, at times enforcement, definitely local government, and then different representing organizations at community level, and having everybody at the table. And then HEARTH is a funding stream to rapidly deploy different forms of shelter or transitional housing, and that's done jointly, decision-making with the local government. The intention, though, is that these are interim fast-track programs for the purpose of resolving where there's complex encampments and significant numbers of unsheltered homelessness in each community. And they really are, we've done phase 1 with some select priority communities, and as we said, it's early days and there's still lots of lessons learned. But it is our first really formal provincial encampment set of programs. And you'll hear later from one of the local governments, Abbotsford. Mike is here to talk about what that looks like on the ground. HEARTH specifically is really intended to be viewed within the broader ecosystem. So what else is coming online? This is intended to be an evidence-informed process where we can adapt to that local need. So it's a standardized program with the flexibility to adapt locally. So having a look at who is in the community and then catering the responses, including the shelter or housing as needed. And so you can see 3 phases here. In terms of the process that we follow, working with local government to understand who's on the ground and who we need to cater to, looking at the different ways that we can align that with the bigger picture in terms of years down the road, making sure that we're meeting distinct needs, and then looking at how we transition in years to come. We're not at that stage yet. And the decisions are really made at that local level, knowing that every set of resources is different in each community. We have had some success in terms of rolling out some different units. In less than 3 years, we'll be rolling out 1,200 units in 10 different communities. The priority communities were selected based on certainly need, although I think we're at a state where we could define need pretty much anywhere in the province. But looking at those complex encampments, as well as a state of readiness, wanting to make sure that the different layers of government could really work well together, and that there were already strong partnerships or opportunities for partnerships in each area as well, to be able to identify roadblocks and try to overcome those to begin with. And every community has taken on a different approach in terms of that balance of transitional housing versus shelter. And again, it's looking at what's available land, and some can be really challenging versus others. And there's opportunities to either expand current sites versus build new ones. So we have everything from tiny home villages to modular home sites to expanding existing overnight shelters.
And just as Erin was saying, to give you a bit of a snapshot of who's involved in that HEARTH, the Homeless Encampment Action Resource Team. Also, if you're familiar with the HEARTH program out of Seattle for many years back, we borrowed that model. It's for the city of Victoria, and they tried that kind of teams approach to doing outreach and support. And so we've really built it on the good experiences that have come from the city of Victoria on that work. So it looks different in every community. Currently, HEARTH and HEARTH are active in two communities, one community in the Fraser Valley, 2 communities on the Vancouver Island. Vancouver has HEARTH, Kelowna has HEARTH, and Prince George in the north has HEARTH. So the makeup looks a little bit different. In some, for example, our police RCMP partners, the coalition of groups really want them there. In others, they want them at a little bit of a distance. That's going to look different depending on kind of where you land. Our First Nations partners, Indigenous providers want to play bigger and smaller roles in this work, depending on where they see themselves in the kind of local fabric, resources, and time. But this gives you a sense of the whole gamut of who could be in that. And it just depends on the flavor and the focus of the area.
I'll just touch lightly on this partner resource. This is in response to requests from community providers as well as local governments finding themselves in a new role of now having encampment response as part of their workload and asking for a resource, like a how-to guide. So this has taken many years in development, and I'm sure many of you have provided some insight. So thank you to those of you who have. Some really strong engagement from a whole range of partners, from advocates to human rights representatives, local First Nations, cross-ministry partners. Under Belonging BC, we also have 2 formal advisory committees that have provided a lot of insight. We have an Indigenous advisory house and also a People with Lived and Living Experience advisory committee. They've been invaluable to developing the implementation of these initiatives. And it really builds on some good practices and offers where some of those gaps are. It was pretty varied feedback, so it's taken a long time to sift through, but I think we'll be able to roll out a good resource. So we're looking at clarity of roles, some good practices and examples, some kind of quick reference go-tos like grab and go. Also, pointing out where there's some guiding policy and legislation already, really wanting to make this a useful tool. For those who have been paying attention to politics, we just had an election in BC, and prior to an election, it's not the best time to roll out some policy work. So we're waiting for new government to formalize and consider our timing in terms of how we can roll that out. So more to come on that. we're just wrapping up here. I think we've already taken more than our time. We like to talk about this topic. What we wanted to share were some of our observations and our takeaways, just in terms of where we've had some learnings, not necessarily even challenges or successes. Having a standardized program with a flexible delivery model is amazing. But it means that you run into all these kind of roadblocks along the way. What happens well in Nanaimo doesn't in Abbotsford, and making sure that we have really individualized relationships along the way. Definitely, as Allison mentioned, the continuous learning and nimble responses. At the provincial level, I think one of our challenges is, there's a lot of encampments on Crown land. And being really clear that we're not an encampment response team that can do individualized housing plans for everyone sleeping in a tent on Crown land, and really managing those expectations. And I'm sure you experience that, especially as service providers, where you get that call. It's like, but they're outside, and it's like, but there's no housing in that community. I'm really sorry. This is what we can do in the meantime, right? We can connect with outreach. We can get them on the supportive housing registry. We can connect with health services. But really, that's all we're able to do. And that's a really hard one for folks who aren't living this every day. So those are a lot of tough conversations that we have with a lot of our colleagues. And I think from my perspective as well, again, sometimes these decisions around what an encampment response should look like and what safety concerns are defined as are made for folks who are actually not in the community at a provincial level sometimes. And that's really tricky to be able to say, I know this doesn't feel good. I know that there's safety concerns, but without adequate housing, we're actually going to deploy other strategies here because it might be more harmful to clear this area. And so it's, that reminder, as Allison said as well, just to slow things down is sometimes the best response. Really take stock of working with our partners, being able to have all those folks on speed dial, right? And say, hey, let's pull together and really determine what the best response is here. As I said earlier, it's really hard to define success, right? Really hard to say what's the best response, what's truly successful here, when we just really don't have enough housing or shelter available. One observation that we're certainly taking away is in BC, we've had significant sustained investment. So with Belonging BC, there's been $1.5 billion of investment over several years. At the same time, there's a number of other provincial approaches that integrate. There's a poverty reduction strategy. There's a Homes for People plan, that's a housing plan. And there's also a response plan for the opioid crisis, also with significant sustained investment. But as you all know, it's not getting better, right? The numbers are growing and the complexity of the people we're serving is also growing. And so I think that's a really hard takeaway for our team, and I'm sure for many of you as well. But a number of reasons that point to why we need to work better together and stay connected. Because sometimes you just need to hear something positive from someone as well, and be able to have some of those reach outs. I can say even at the provincial level, I'm not on the ground. I used to work in nonprofit, but quite honestly, I got tired and I needed to shift, what I do. And so now I work at the provincial level, and it's still really hard being that far removed. Do you want to share some of your takeaways?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I really want to turn the mic over to Mike and Maria and hear about the Fraser and hear about how it's landing on the ground. But I think Erin really captured all those pieces really well. So with that, Mike, Maria, we'll turn it over to you to talk about Abbotsford.
Good. Is it afternoon? I'm going to use this because I don't like to stand still. As I said earlier, my name is Mike. I work for the City of Abbotsford. I'm a Senior Manager of Housing and Homelessness. I think Erin just mentioned that coming from the nonprofit world, I've been working in this field for going on almost 20 years, nonprofit, health authority, treatment centers, and for the last 9 years, local government. So I have seen my fair share of ups and downs as well, and staff retention challenges and all of the above. I'm curious, Allison, at the beginning asked for people to put up their hands. How many people here are from BC? So a good portion. Thank you. So for those of you that aren't in BC, and even some in BC, some of this may be new to you, although I doubt it, municipalities don't provide services. We don't get funding from the provincial government. We don't build buildings. We don't have staff that do outreach, and often we are looked to as the organizations that do that. So it's oft, I very often have opportunities to kind of share that information with people because it's not known. They look to the local government for solutions. And while we say we don't provide services, I don't want that to be a scapegoat. We do play a very supportive role in all of the pieces that were mentioned earlier and so much more. But I'm just going to jump into Abbotsford. So Abbotsford, we are I'd call us a medium-sized community. I think we're 7th in the province for population size. 160,000 people. Median house price is almost $1 million. I think that actually might be a little bit higher now. Our rental vacancy rate, that is high. It's actually 0.9% on the average. We did a pit count in 2023. It was 406. It's considerably higher now. We just completed one a couple of weeks ago. We have 7 shelters in our community, approximately 222 beds. Now that changes depending on the weather and what pocket the money comes out of, or how many we're funded for versus how many we're providing. And we have a number of encampments in our community. I identified 11 or 12 major encampments there. I would suggest we probably have upwards of 50 sleeping sites in our community that include these major encampments. From our point-in-time count, I mean, you can see from that slide there that roughly, when this data snapshot was taken, 209 people were sleeping in shelters, which leaves probably, you're looking at a more accurate number, over 300 people sleeping outside. So it's large, and it continues to grow. We're also seeing a lot more diversity. So in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more RVs. We've seen a lot more families with children, which is concerning because when we look at how do we respond, our response has been fairly straightforward across the board for the types of responses that we have for the population that we've been supporting for the last decade or more. So great opportunity there. I will also highlight, and it was either highlighted by Allison or Aaron, that when you look along at this, you see those blue triangles, 8 of them are on provincial land. So they're add another layer of complexity to how, as a municipality, we respond to those things. And those 8 probably pulled almost half of the people that are sleeping outside. So a little bit of setting the stage for Abbotsford. I don't think you can talk about encampments without talking about the work that you do as a local government. And so for our local government, Mayor and Council adopted a homelessness action plan update. So we've had one for years that works to really support or supplement the work that the province does and the investment from the province in our community, both from housing as well as health. And some of the key takeaways that we did in that is, what are we capable of? What can we do? And so we looked at our zoning bylaws. How do we remove some of the barriers to implement housing on a much quicker pace, and taking out some of the bureaucratic process that is not necessary to provide emergency response to issues. We've provided, I think, 60+ year leases, a number of properties. I don't know if that's 5 or actually maybe 6, because there's a couple more that are going to be signed in the next couple of months, for providing supportive housing. We want to be a municipality that says, hey, how can we support? Maybe we don't provide those services. Maybe we're not writing checks for millions of dollars, but we do have land, and our land can be utilized. I think one of the opportunities there, and I heard a speech, or I heard a presentation yesterday, it was actually Jamie's presentation, where they're thinking forward. How do we look at properties that we can, for years down the road and prepare for things that we know we need, but not necessarily when somebody's knocking at our door saying, I need a property. So we have some work to do there. We've developed an application. Some of you may have heard of it if you're from BC, working with GIS and our outreach community called CHIA, Community Homelessness Information Application. So what that is a web-based service that our outreach workers carry. They use it on their phones, and you can update information on encampments, where you are, the types of services you've provided, how many people are sleeping there. And it's a tool that's used by outreach workers so that I know that if I'm going to an encampment, I can see if somebody's been there in the last couple of hours. Given the amount of encampments that we have in our community and great agencies, there's often duplication. And so this was a way of trying to streamline that, as well as it captures a little bit of data. Important to note that this is not at all used for enforcement purposes. So like our bylaw department, for example, has access to input stuff, but they don't have access to some of the details. We also don't take personal information. So it's really, it's merely numbers and locations. And then we are one of those communities for the HEARTH program. I think in April there was announced 220 shelter beds coming to our community. And so we're looking forward to that, as it would make a large dent in the challenges that we're experiencing, as well as we are also a designated community under Reaching Home. So all that, How do we manage encampments? And for the purpose of this, maybe encampments we can say is, we haven't defined it. Is it 1 tent, 5 tents, 20 tents? So supporting individuals that are sleeping outside. Partnerships very important. I heard us saying yesterday, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I wrote that down. It is very true. So for years in BC, there's been a little bit of a disconnect from provincial members as well as BC Housing and Crown Corporation. It's been very prescriptive. And I know I can say this because that's changing. And one of the things that we're really hopeful for and is a great opportunity is bridging that gap between senior government, local government, and community. So right now, in the process of developing systems leadership table, I suppose you could call it. And how do you roll in a number of the tables that are currently going on to capture everything that is important for agencies in the community to do and have the right people there, leadership, decision makers, that you can funnel information to and from as far as what does the community need. I think one of the biggest and most key important pieces for that is that we actually, community has a voice at this table. So if we know that BC Housing is going to be putting X million dollars into our community, what's more important? Is it a shelter for seniors? Is it a shelter for women and children? Or what is that? So giving a local voice to resources, there are some things we can control, some things we can't control, but it's really important. So I'm looking forward to that. When I think about responding to encampments also, I think about, are we addressing? Are we managing? Are we providing support for? And I think it's all of the above. Not every encampment it's necessary to act right now. I mean, if we don't have housing, what's the point of moving somebody? If you're going to move them tomorrow and then they get somewhere else and you move them the day after that, I think that's really tough on people. And I completely empathize with everybody involved in that, and it's hard. It's hard to watch. Allison said it's hard. This work is very hard. But there are some camps that you have to actually address. You do a risk management kind of perspective. We have some camps that are right on the highway that you have to cross 2 lanes to get to because they're in cloverleaf roundabouts. Like, that's important to manage that or address that because somebody's going to get hit by a car, somebody's going to die. So we address those at a case-by-case basis. And I know that as a municipality, we have some that are on our property. We do the same thing. But then comes the strategy. How do you do that? What does that look like? Who do you pull together? What's the process? What's the timeline? How do you inform community, et cetera, which is very important. And one of the things that's really being brought together as we've actually, how many encampments have we had to respond to? In the last year, I think it's been 4. 4 encampments, I would suggest totaling probably a couple hundred people. And for those of you that don't know, right now there's an encampment on City Hall property. So we are wading through that right now as well. What does that look like to provide appropriate types of housing and shelter for people? But I'm going to turn it over to Maria. Maria's going to talk a little bit about the encampment response. BC Housing kind of leads that up in our community as the holder of funds and the director of resources.
Okay, so quite a long slide. I'm not going to go through each point. So basically, it's a coordinated response with the province, the city, law enforcement, bylaw, community service providers, right? There's no one agency that does it all alone. So how does BC Housing act as the coordinator? As with anything else we roll out, we identify a date. Usually it's when the trespass notice date will be issued, and we work our way backwards. So hopefully we know that date way in advance and we have weeks to plan. The glue that holds it together for us is the encampment response plan. That's where we clarify roles and responsibilities, like it's a document that we share. It defines the current situation, and it has a timeline of when things will happen, who will do what, and when. Between the dates of the delivery for the notice of trespass and the closure date, we have daily meetings for the operational folks, right? The frontline people, they have daily meetings, while the strategy people, more the management, decision makers, have meetings usually weekly, but the cadence is sort of decided on when we meet first. The first meeting, sorry. So we do ask for shelter holds. So in the daily meetings between the service providers and the city and BC Housing, we ask that the shelter providers put holds on their available beds, right? We don't ask them to kick people out. They will come to the meeting, say what their vacancies are, and we ask them to put them on hold, usually until 3 p.m. And that's when they decide if someone will be moving in or not. We also do assisting with packing, storage, and relocation as necessary. And belongings are usually stored by the city. And then the closure takes place and land remediation happens.
Thanks, Maria. We'll hear a bit more from Maria again in a few moments, but there's a lot of work there. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, you can write this plan on a napkin. I hate to say it. We take it and we make it 20 pages long because we put a whole bunch of information in here, but it's straightforward. It's not easy, but it's straightforward. And so there's a lot of time and effort and energy and planning that has to go into this. I mean, you're asking frontline workers to meet every single day of the week for, weeks leading up to this. You're facilitating meetings, you're sharing that information, the province and BC Housing are drafting their response plans and disseminating that on a regular basis, both the response plans and the sit reps. And so it's can be cumbersome, but it is still straightforward.
Mike, can I just throw one thing in there?
Please.
It's important, I think, people to understand. Prior to this, our teams are developing by name lists, and that work is often, that could be 6 months of work, that could be 3 months of work. So that's really the slow part that you need the space for, is that relationship development that the folks in Abbotsford, there's 3 or 4 different outreach groups right now, including BC Housing Outreach. And that's the important work, I think, before we get to this, that we know we do, but we don't necessarily talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I think, and on that note too, why it takes so long is not everybody has the same sleep rhythm or cadence as you and I do. Not everybody has, structure, I suppose, in their lives. So you could go there during the day, during any given day, and you might find 4 or 5 empty tents. The next day, those might be full. It's hit and miss, and who you're going to find. And so, we're even finding that right now. Again, I'll reference our encampment outside of City Hall. It's outside our doors. We're there every single day. And getting that by names list accurate so that you can then work towards providing responses, it's a challenge and it takes a lot of time. Again, as I've said numerous times, we're in the process. We're in the process of coming together. We're in the process of building the ship. But it's hard work. And we've said all these things. Some of them are really cliche, but we can't do this all alone. Housing is always the goal. It's not about displacing people. It's not about moving somebody so then you can move them again a couple weeks later, get off my property and get on that property. It's an interesting thing. I'm sure we've all experienced it, having provincial land next to municipal land, next to private land, and the property owner says, well, you can't be here, but if you go over there, I don't have to necessarily address that. So how do we support people through all this? One of the biggest challenges, I think, and lessons, challenges, maybe we have a challenge slide as well, is substance use. Substance use is one of the pieces that really makes it challenging because some of the shelter providers are not well equipped to support the needs of individuals who are really struggling with substance use. So for example, if you have a curfew at night, but you can't use on site, how many people are going to go to that from an encampment when we use? And so, having to learn how to shift to a needs-based kind of approach is really important. And we're working to have a plan. We do a lot as reactionary, but how can we kind of pause and look forward and say, this is what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. And so we're in that process right now, and I look forward actually to the next couple of months as we work with BC Housing, Ministry of Housing, and Canadian Alliance actually on unrolling some of this stuff out. And I know we're going to hear some more from you guys at the end of this as well, but I'm going to pass this over to, is this my slide, Maria? Yeah. I already said some of these things. Not enough shelter beds. I think that's across the board for all of us. Complex care, complex processes. I don't even know what that means, but I wrote it. Personal agency. Here's a great example. And we were doing a decampment there. I think there was 60 people, and I hate to say we were doing a decampment. We were working with individuals to try to get them. We opened a brand new shelter. BC Housing opened a brand new shelter with a local nonprofit. And there were roughly 60 individuals in this camp that was, very problematic. And every single individual was offered one of those spaces. 20 brand new beds. I think it was pet friendly. You could bring your belongings. You could go as community. One person took it and they left the next day. and there was nobody in this. It was a brand new build, brand new shelter. And so that's a challenge. It's a challenge to how do you address that? How do you manage that when you're trying to do good work and support individuals? And obviously there's answers to that. And then finally, garbage. Garbage. I mean, that's an easy one. It should be an easy one. If we could make sites, help support sites stay clean, then I think a lot of the pressure as local governments would be decreased. Safety concerns would be decreased. Neighborhoods would not have as many challenges with it as well. But it's proving to be a little bit of a challenge, especially when you have cross-jurisdictional kind of properties in your community. I mean, I think we spend almost $1 million a year just cleaning up after things related to homelessness or encampments and whatnot. And so, how do you sustain that? Anyways, Maria, you're up.
Okay, just to go back to the some lessons learned from the regional operations perspective of our team. Of course, the need for housing far exceeds supply, right? And the clients are unable to access shelter due to service restrictions, like they have pets. For couples, that's a big thing too. And then availability of just the bunks, and it's a top bunk, you can appreciate no one wants to move there. Logistics like storage of belongings and transportation, especially if they have a whole bunch of staff. Some shelters are successful in having sea cans installed in their parking lots, but not everyone does that. And then a lot of clients we're finding need a higher level of care than what the shelter or supportive housing offers. So there's a bit of that gap there. A big piece to look at too is the staff self-care. We do not currently have staff for encampment response in our team that does only encampment response. We have the 2 HEARTH outreach workers, and we have coordinated access and assessment managers who do this sort of over the side of their desks, but it's now becoming closer and closer to the center of their desk. So, that's one of the challenges. But we do have successes. It's not perfect. We're working very hard, but I think it's a lot better. It's a lot better than before. Partnerships and communication, that's the main thing. In Abbotsford, we have well-established working relationships, which we have had for years between the nonprofits, BC Housing, and the municipality. We have our coordinated access team on the ground almost daily in the different municipalities, and they have these relationships. We also have supportive housing advisors who are portfolio managers who work closely with the executive directors of the nonprofits and service providers. The emergency response plan, again, tailored to specific needs, depending on where the encampment is, who is at the encampment, we need to be specific on what they need and how we will address that. Dedicated time and resources, I don't think the other people know this, but our regional ops team, we don't just have the folks on the ground, we have everyone on standby, it's all hands on deck. Even the portfolio managers, financial analysts, admin people working from home or from our home office, they're like ready to jump into their cars, go to Abbotsford if they need to support our team there. If there's any funding request or anything that needs to be processed ASAP related to the camp, that's my instruction. They're all ready and available to go. They're all on standby. Also with dedicated time, again, the operational meetings, the shelter holds, the reporting is very important, and then the identified leads and support. Sharing of knowledge, expertise, and resources, open communication between the partners, transparency, this is what we can give, this is what we can fund, we have expertise in this area, just everyone's like willing to help, we're doing this together, and it just manages expectations so that no one is, expecting one partner to deliver something and they don't fall, it doesn't become sort of a blaming game here. Everyone's here to help. And of course, coming from a trauma-informed and client-centered approach to response, very, very crucial was having Indigenous outreach available. And again, like Alison said, shelter is a gateway to housing that makes it more equitable for the whole process to access housing.
So one thing we said we weren't going to do was talk too much because it's 3:30 in the afternoon, and we wanted very much to tap into the expertise here. And of course, we have so much to say. You can see why we love to work together. And we've talked way over what we thought we were going to do. So I'm going to skip over the question period, and we're going to jump into tapping into your expertise. And we'll talk for maybe 7 or 8 minutes. We'll get up us and we'll move to tables and switch some of the questions around because we'd really love to hear some perspectives from you. We do have a couple of prescribed questions here. If you're sitting on the side, feel free to come join the table. But if you have other things to say, don't feel like you have to stick to the questions. So Allison, you're going to join this table. Your question number 2. Mike, you're going to join this table over here. Your question number 1. Maria, back left, number 3. And I'll come join you. We get to make up some of our own questions. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Hey folks, I'm so sorry to interrupt the rich conversation. I'm just going to let everyone know we're almost at time here. Feel free to continue, but I do just want to say on behalf of my colleagues here, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your interest, and thank you so much for this rich discussion. I think that we could go on and on for hours, and it's just so representative of the true passion and dedication in this room. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.